Bezras Hashem. Bezras Hashem. Today's daf is daf Chav Gimel, and today we'll begin daf Chav Beis Amud Beis by the middle of the page, and we'll be able to cover ground because there's less. There's less pictures today, and very straightforward Gemara. The Gemara is discussing over here about marrying your sister. Okay, so marrying your sister. It's interesting. You think it's strange, but in the Shir HaShirim, God refers to us as his wife. But besides that, sometimes it refers to us as his achoisi kala. You ever heard that expression? My sister, the kala. So I don't know. It's high in yonim. So the Gemara discusses there are two types of sisters that you can have. One is a regular sister from your mother. You share a common mother, or even if you don't share a common mother, but your father was married to that woman. The second way to have a sister, so that's this picture over here. You have Yaakov, who's married to Miriam, married to Sarah. From one lady, he has Reuven, a male, and one he has a female. So they're sisters, and their father married their mothers. But there's another way to have a sister, is if your father had an affair and you have a sister. So now now there are two psukim about marrying your sister in the Torah, and we'll see. And because there are two psukim, we'll see what the ramifications of that. So we begin by Tanu Rabbanan, about 20 lines from the top, 22 lines from the top. The Gemara begins Tanu Rabbanan Haba ala chaysay. If someone marries or has relations with his sister, he basha eshes aviv, and it's his normal sister, the daughter of the wife of his father. So chayev mishum achoisei, you're chayev not only because it's your sister, or mishum bas eshes aviv, because it's the daughter of your father's wife. In other words, that the Chumash says two psukim about your sister. We're going to see it in a second. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says, or Rabbi Yehuda, Ein chayev al mishum achoisei bavad. You only get one avera over there of achoisei. It's not. You don't get the avera of the daughter of your father's wife. In other words, if you did this by accident, I don't know how. If you did it by accident, according to the Chachamim, you chayev two chataos. According to Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, you get one chatas. Obviously, if you did it on purpose, you can get karas. You can't die twice. But if you did it by accident, so according to Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, you get one avera, and according to Chachamim, you get two averas. So the Gemara asked, "My time the Rabbanim. What's the reason why, according to Rabbanim, you get two averas?" Amrei. So they said, "Michti, let us read the pasuk Psukim in Parshas Achrei, where it talks about the erbas. It says, "Ksiv erbas achoischa." In other words, you're not allowed to live with your sister. She's your daughter's father or the daughter of your mother. Now, this pasuk, this first pasuk, it says your sister, but it doesn't say that your father got married. It's the daughter of your father. So it could be your father had an affair with somebody, and that's how you have a sister. Or your mother had an affair with someone, and she had a daughter. Whatever it is, or if it's from a previous marriage. But anyway, if someone has a sister that way, that's the first pasuk, this yellow. Then the Torah says, "Ervas bas eshes avicha, moledes avicha choischa he." The Torah says that the daughter of the wife of your father is your sister and someone born from your family. That implies that it's your father got married normally. Let's say it's your mother, or if it's from another wife. But still, it was a normal marriage, and you have a sister from a normal marriage. So, Lamali, why did the Torah's pasuk have to say two psukim? So the Torah gives you two psukim. Is Shma Mina. From here, you see, if you have relations with your sister, and it's a sister because your father married somebody, and they had a daughter, either it's your mother or somebody else. You get two averis, these two psukim. You get because it's your sister, and it's because the daughter of your father's wife. Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, seemingly Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, what does he do? There's two psukim over here. Amakra, the pasuk says, that when it's the daughter of your father's wife, when it's a normal marriage, and you have a sister through a normal marriage, the Torah says, it's your sister. So the Torah is saying, I could only get you the error. You only get one avera. It's because it's your sister. But you don't get an avera because it's the daughter of your father's wife. So in other words, that pasuk is extra. That pasuk is, according to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, is not telling you get an extra avera because your father married this lady. No, you get the same avera of the original pasuk that you can't have relations with your sister. Ervas achoischa basavicha basamecha. That's the only avera. So your first question should be, according to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, if you don't get another avera, what does ervas bash eshes avicha teach you? I mean, what is it teaching you? If you're not getting an avera, what's that coming to tell you? But the Gemara asks the other way. Rabbanan, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda seems to have an exclusion in the pasuk. The Torah says, "Achois chahi." You only get one avera for your sister. So what did the Rabbanim do with that? Rabbanim hay achois chahi my avdelay. What did they do with that achois chahi, which tells you only get one avera for sleeping with your sister? So the Gemara says, let's say your father had an affair with somebody, and you're born from that affair. The boy is born from that affair, and the sister is born from that affair. Then Yechayev if the boy has relations with his sister. Now, this is interesting because the Torah said that even if your father was married to your mother and you're the boy, and then he had an affair with somebody else, so it's only sharing a common father. If you only share a common father with that girl, that anusa girl, we'll call her the anusa, the one that your father had an affair. And if you only share a common father, Yechayev, it's your sister. So why does the Torah have to tell you that if you both were born from the same woman, Yechayev because it's your sister? Wouldn't I make a kal v'chomer? Ma'adich, if you share a common father, Yechayev for sleeping with your sister. If you share a common father and mother, certainly Yechayev for sleeping with your sister. Because there's a din, loymar, to teach you a teaching. She'ein mashira min a din. You can't punish somebody and make up a new law, a new prohibition, just because you can think of it as a kal v'chomer. You can think of it logically on your own. You don't do that. You can't do that unless the Torah says it's prohibited. Then it's prohibited. So without the Torah teaching you that, I would think that the only time you chayav sleeping with your sister, only if you share a common father, not if you share a common father and mother. Kamash Milan, that the achois basavicha or basimecha, that teaches teaches you. That's what the Rabbanan say. That teaches you that if you share common parents, you're chayiv. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, how does he know that concept? That even if you share common parents, you're chayiv. So in Cain, lichter rachmana, the Torah should have written achoischa. You should say just achoischa. That teaches you that even if they're common parents, you're chayiv, and that would teach you the din ein masira min hadin. That you don't come up with your own thing. The Torah has to explicitly write to you about a sister from both parents. But the extra word that extra, this one, lamali, what does that teach you? So it teaches you that you only chayv one avera. You only chayv because it's your sister, and you're not chayv an extra avera because it's the daughter of your father. So the Gemara asks back, okay, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda really came up with a good answer. He said, we have an extra word he over here. You see the word he, and that teaches you that you only get one avera. So why does the Torah write he according to Rabbanan? Rabbanan afagav the kosav rachmana achoischa, even though the Torah wrote you, it's your sister, itzrach lemichtav he. The Torah has to write the word he. Shloi toimar, you should not say, ba'alma in other places, mashir min adin. Really, I could make up my own kal v'chomer, and the Torah doesn't have to tell you that. And the Torah told you by a choischa that even if you have share both parents, you're chayiv. Why does the Torah write a choischa? Because milsa the asya b'kal v'chomer torach v'kosav lakos. Sometimes the Torah adds extra words, even though you could figure it out on your own. So just having one extra word teaching you that idea of ein oinshim and adin, you wouldn't figure that out. You would say that the Torah, it's not extra, the Torah didn't have to tell you. And truth be told, that I probably could make up prohibitions if I could think of it with a kal v'chomer. So kosav rachmana he, that's why the Torah had to write he, to teach you that no, here I'm specifically telling you, your sister that's from your both parents, the Torah specifically to tell you it's prohibited. you would think about it on your own. You don't need the Torah to tell you that. But the Torah is teaching you a teaching that even sometimes you can figure out a prohibition. It's still the Torah has to explicitly write it out, because you can't give punishments by making up your own prohibition. The Torah has to write it out specifically. But Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda also has this cloud that you need two limudim to teach you that ain't onshim in adin. So he says, "In kein lichtav rachmon al achois chi beidachra." You see, look at these two psukim. The first pasuk, the yellow ervas achois is talking about when your father had an affair, and baseish sabicha, the daughter of your father, is regular marriage. Through a regular marriage, you have a sister. The two psukim, right? So if we're trying to teach you a din that when your father had an affair with a woman, and you were both, the boy and the girl were both born from that woman, even though I probably could have made a kal v'chomer, because in the first pasuk it said that even if you share a common father, it's still considered your sister. But if it share both parents, the Torah had to write it out specifically. Now, the Torah, according to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, should have written the achoischa in that pasuk. The Torah should have put the achoischa over here. Because this achoischa is going back to on a sister where your father had an affair, and you yourself were born from that same affair. So why does the Torah put it by the pasuk that talks about a normal marriage? To teach you another teaching, and that's the point of Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. There's another teaching in this achois chahi to teach you that if you have relations with your sister, and your sister is from a regular marriage with your father, you only get one avera, not two averas. Okay, so we finished that point, explaining and squaring off the Rabbanan. Now we have to get back to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda. Again, the Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda said that if you have relations with the sister through marriage, right? A regular sister, your father married your mother or another woman, you have a normal sister, you get an avera of one avera, ervas achar, the first pasuk, right? That's one avera, but not this. You don't get an extra avera. So then the Gemara's question is, then what do I need this pasuk? Ervas bas eses avicha. What do you get from that? Because according to Rabbanan, you get two averas, but according to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, you only get one avera. So why does the Torah write that? That's the question over here. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, hi bas eses avicha, my avadle. What does he do with that second pasuk about the daughter of your father's wife? You don't get an extra avera for that. So what is that teaching you? So he said like this: the only time you are getting an avera for sleeping with your sister is only if it's your sister through a kosher marriage. If your father married somebody who he was capable of marrying, prop that excludes if your father had an affair with a maid or a shiksa, a goya, your father has no relation with that person. So a sister from a goita, if your father had a relation with a goita, that sister is not under the prohibition of ervas achoischa. So that's what Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. So the Gemara asks again against Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. The aim of prat lachoise manusa. Maybe it's trying to exclude your sister from an affair. In other words, maybe your sister from a goya would be included in that pasuk. But what's prat le'eshes avicha means you have to really be married. Prat if your father had an affair. And the first pasuk that bas avicha will be talking about a goy. In other words, he's saying, how do you know this ervas achoischa bas avicha bas imecha is talking about your father had an affair with a Jewish woman? Maybe he's talking about if your father had an affair with a goyish woman, but if he had an affair with a Jewish woman, that's not considered your sister. So the Gemara says that you can't say. If your father had an affair with a Jewish woman, that's for sure your sister. So the Gemara says, that you can't ever say that, because there's other places in the Torah which seem to say that even if your father had an affair with a woman, that child is considered your father's child. And since it's considered your father's child, so it's considered your sister. Where do you see that? The Rava Rami. Rava had a contradiction. Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, Ervas bas binchoy bas bitcho lo segala. You can't sleep with your granddaughter, okay? You can't sleep with your granddaughter. But what about your wife's granddaughter? Habas bino bas dido. Sorry, you could sleep with your wife's granddaughter, or it seems that it's permitted. But then another pasuk says, if you get married to a woman, you can't sleep with her daughter and her granddaughter. So how do you resolve that? Can you sleep with your wife's granddaughter or not? It depends. Okay, if you were never married to that woman, then their granddaughter doesn't become usher to you. When you are married to her, then the granddaughter becomes usher to you. But since we exclude somebody who's an oinus, that really it's your child, but you wouldn't get the aver of sleeping with your grandchild, your grandchild, even from the woman that you had an affair with. We see that there is still some type of relationship there, and because of that, we can assume also that if a man has an affair with somebody, that girl is considered his daughter, really, and therefore the brother is considered his brother. And so you can't say that if you sleep with your sister when your father had an affair with a Jewish woman, it's not your sister. That's certainly your sister. So when is it not your sister? If your father had an affair with a maid or a guy. So the Gemara goes, now we go to Chaf Gimel Amalef. Maybe let us say something else. Maybe the Torah is telling you it's not your sister if your father married somebody who he's prohibited from marrying. For example, if your father married a mamzeres and they had a daughter, maybe that's not your sister. Because I would say that your father wasn't supposed to marry such a person. And that's what the pasuk is saying. When your father does such a thing, there's still a good marriage there. The pasuk says, Torah tells you that if you have two wives, one you love or one you hate. Now, you shouldn't give the pishnayim that you're supposed to give, the double portion that you're supposed to give to the bechor. Don't give it to the bechor of the woman that you love if the woman you hate is older. That if that's the bechor, that's the one you have to give the double portion. So the Gemara asks, how could you? You can't say, is there somebody loved by the Eibishter or hated by God? In other words, we wouldn't have such a pre-thought that you probably can bypass the real bechor from the woman that you hate. Just because you hate her, you can't cheat your real bechor, your real firstborn. Ella, what the Chumash is telling you, that if your father married somebody that they weren't supposed to marry, ahuva means ahuva b'sanel. It's a loved marriage that Hashem wanted you to marry this woman. Snua means snua b'nisu'el. If Hashem hated that marriage, and for example, if you married a mamzeres, but if you married a mamzeres and that boy is the bechor, the Torah is telling you he gets the pishnayim, he gets the double portion. You can't cheat him out. But al kapanim, the Torah says kisiyena. When you will marry that person. So the Torah is teaching you that even though there's a lav, a chayve lav, to marry this woman, there's kedushin there. So if there's kedushin there, certainly the girl that's born is your sister. So of course, if you have relations with that girl, it's your sister. So that cannot be what the Torah's bas eishes avicha coming to exclude. Again, it's only coming to exclude if your father had a daughter from a goita, from a shifcha or a goya. So the Gemara says, "Ve'ema lechprat lechayave krisis." Maybe the Torah is coming to tell you that if you have relations with a chayve krisis, let's say your father had a relationship with his aunt, right? And then you have a sister because your father had an affair with his aunt. Maybe that's not your sister. The pasuk says, "Erbas achoischa bas avicha bas imecha meledis bayis meledis chutz." Here, the Torah adds an extra word. Meledis bias, a woman that can remain in the house, or meledis chutz, or from a woman that he has to throw out of his house. So that's still considered your sister. Even whether they tell your father, keep that wife, keep that lady, say you have to get rid of her. The Torah says that's your sister. So even though the kedushin, nobody would agree that it's a marriage. You can't marry his aunt. But if he would take his aunt, have an affair with her, and have a sister, and have a girl, that girl is brother and sister with the father's original boy. So that's not the case. So the Gemara says, why don't you say the opposite? Now you're going to have two psukim. Okay, you're going to have two psukim. One pasuk says that when there's no kedushin and the father has a girl, that's your sister. For example, if he married a chayove, if he had an affair with a chayove krisis. And then we have another pasuk that says that if your father has an affair with a goy to bas eshes avicha, it's only for a woman that he could marry. So therefore, it excludes that if she has an affair with a goita, that girl is not your sister. So the Gemara wants to say maybe the opposite. Maybe that's coming to include that if you have a sister from a maid or a goita, that maybe that is included to be your sister. But the Gemara answers back, but we have another pasuk that says it's not your sister. That excludes your sister from a maid or a goita. So you have two psukim. One pasuk says that a sister from a goita is not your sister. A sister from a chayve krisis, let's say your father married his wife's sister. That's and you have a sister that way, that is your sister. So the Gemara asks, Mar Isa, what made you try to include one to be in your sister and not include the other? So the Gemara says, Mistabra, it makes more sense to say that you include the Jewish girl. Chayave krisis havelei the rabbi shekain tafse kedusha la'alma. The chayave krisis is basically with a Jewish woman. It's your wife's sister or your father's aunt, whatever it is. Technically, that woman is a Jewish woman where other people can marry her. So therefore, that's why that would be considered your sister. But a goita, a shifcha, nobody can marry her. There's no kedusha, no Jew can marry her. And therefore, if your father has a girl from that woman, that's not your sister. So the Gemara asks back, Adarabba, let's say the opposite. Shifcha v'goya havelei rabbis. Let's include a shifcha and a goya, include that's your sister. The megaira, if she would become a ger, lididei nami tafsid b'kedusha. Potentially, he could have married her. You see, if your father had an affair with a goita, true, he can't. She's not Jewish, but technically, she could become a ger, and it could work. But if he married his aunt and had an affair with his aunt, there's no way he could ever marry that person. So, in certain respects, the goita woman is more of a possibility as a wife to this person than a chayve krisis, and therefore the girl born from that should be more considered like your sister. Answers the Gemara, gufa acharina. When a woman becomes a ger, it's not the same person. It's another body. It's like we said before, ger shenis gayer cotton shalayla dummy. A ger that's born, that's somebody else. So that's not the same person over here. And therefore, from that pasuk, we could only exclude a woman that's not Jewish. So that girl that's born is not your sister. But we would include that if your father had an affair with his wife's sister or his aunt or chayve krisis, somebody you can never marry, still that girl would be considered your sister. This idea of Gershon Esgaya Cotton Shenoila Dami, we see in the Torah. After Matan Torah, Amram was married, the father of Moshe Rabbeinu, was married to Yocheved, his aunt. And nevertheless, after Matan Torah, we don't see that they gave a get to each other. Possibly because Gershon Esgaya Cotton Shenoila Dami. They're brand new people, so they're not considered related to each other. Anyway, Rabbanan. Now the Gemara asks about, okay, now Rabbanan need a source. How do you know that if you have a sister from a goita, it's not your sister? Rabbanan lamuti shifcha v'goya menalahu. How do they know that concept? Nafgaluhu, they learn it from the isha v'leha tila denel. The Torah tells you that if you marry a shifcha, it's not your boy. It belongs to your master. So that belongs to your master. So we have another source. So Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda do that pasuk? So he says, Chad b'shifcha, that pasuk only teaches you by a maid, that it's not your son. But Chad b'goya, and one pasuk, I need the eish basa eish zabicha, by if you marry a regular shiksa, not a maid, which has no a boss over her, no adain, that is also not your sister. And why do I need two psukim for these two different types of women? One's a shifcha, one's a goya, utzricha. And the Gemara says, I need two psukim. The ashmi in shifcha, if I would only teach you that a shifcha, that a daughter from a shifcha is not your sister, from a maid, mishum de ein lo chayis, because a shifcha maid has no lineage. In other words, all she is a maid, not related to anybody. Therefore, it's not even considered your sister. Avagoya, when a goita, a stamus, a regular non-Gentile woman, the islochayis. The Torah sometimes references a goy after his father. Rashi brings a couple examples, but we could bring an example from the Megillah Esther. Haman ben Hamdasa, Haman the son of Abdasa. So therefore, a goy somehow has a lineage over here. I might think, so therefore, it's more of an importance by a guy, more of a chashivus, and therefore, if your father had an affair with a guy and they had a daughter, maybe that daughter is your sister, a maloi. So I might think that would be considered your sister, and you'd be chayiv. V'yashmin and goy, if it would just tell you that a goita is not your sister, mishum deloy shayicha b'mitzvahs, because having a goita herself, the woman herself, has nothing to do with mitzvahs. Aval shifcha, a shifcha kananis, a goyisha maid, the shaykha b'mitzvahs. She has to keep mitzvahs, because if her master is a Jew, she's chayiv in mitzvahs like a woman. Maloi, I might think that wouldn't be included into not being your sister, and therefore I might think that is your sister, and you'd be chayiv. Tzricha, that's why I need two psukim. So again, you need two psukim to teach you that if the father had an affair, whether it was with the shivcha, whether it was a goya, that daughter is not your sister. I need two psukim. So the Rabbanan had only one pasuk. They had Meisha v'lidel. So how do I know the Rabbanan ashkechan shivcha goya menoluhu? How do they know a goya? We only have one pasuk of Isha v'lidel. Bas eishes abicha is not used because Bas eishes abicha teaches you that you have two averis if you marry your sister from a normal marriage. So where do they know the goy piece? From a shivcha, you can't learn it from a shivcha. Hanu mitzvah stricha. We just said that shivcha would not be, we need shivcha. I would think only shivcha is not your sister, but maybe goita is your sister. I need an extra pasuk. There's another pasuk. Amakra. By the 7 nations that lived in Israel, the Torah says, you should not intermarry with them. And the Torah says that if they would marry a Jewish woman, their father, who's a guy, ki yaser es bincha ma'acharai. The Torah is concerned, maybe he's going to make that Jewish kid serve Avodah Zarah, even though the mother is Jewish. But the Torah doesn't say the opposite case, where the mother is non-Jewish and the boy is Jewish. The Torah doesn't say that the mother is going to turn that boy into a guy. So what does the Torah seem to imply that case? That kid is a guy from the begin with, so there's nothing to turn. So what the Torah is basically, in essence, telling you, Bincha Yisrael is Kare Bincha. Your son from a Jewish is called your son. Then Bincha Bom and a Goya Kare Bincha. The son that comes from a Goita is not called your son. Ela B'na, it's her son. And same thing over here. A daughter born from a Goita is not your daughter, but her daughter. And therefore, again, there would not be an Isser of marrying that's not called your sister if it's not called a sister. So we have this pasuk Kiyasa. Amar Ravina said, Shmamina ben bitcha bom in a goy karibincha. Your son from your daughter, that your daughter had an affair with a guy, and that boy, your grandson, that's still called bincha, that's still called your son. So Gemara asks on just a side question, not related to our Gemara. Ravina just said a comment that if your daughter had an affair with a guy, it's a real normal son. Right? So Lema Kasava Ravina, Goy the Eved Haba Bas Yisrael. If you have a Goy that has a relationship with a Jewish girl, Havlat kosher, it's a kosher child. But there is an opinion that holds that it's a mamzer. So would Ravina hold that it's a full-fledged kosher Jew? You give him mafta Yona? So the Gemara says, no, neither mamzer loyhava. He's not a mamzer, but kosher that he can marry Jewish people, but kosher nami loyhava. Yisrael apostle mikre. He's called a Yisrael apostle, and therefore that if it's a girl, she shouldn't be marrying a Kohen. There's something wrong and not right with that person. His father's a goy. It's very common. The father is a goy, and the mother's Jewish, and they hooked on to Lubavitch. Nevertheless, the Gemara seems to say it's Yisrael apostle mikre. It's an apostle, a Jew, and has to be careful on who they marry. So the Gemara says, okay. But hi b'shiva umas ksiv, that pasuk is only by the 7 nations. That tells you that if you marry a goita, it's not your son. But maybe by other nations, it would be your son. So the Gemara says, Ki yasir l'rabbis kol ha'masir. It says Ki yasir. The Torah didn't have to tell you what the reason is. I don't allow you to marry a goita of the 7 nations. The Torah gives you a reason to include that any goy that you marry, that child is not your child. Only if the mother's Jewish, it's your child. But if the mother is non-Jewish, it's not your child. Doesn't matter what nation, because Ki yasir. So Gemara says, Hani Rab Shimon darsh time in the Kra. It's good, very good, according to Rab Shimon, that says that really I can figure out reasons of the Torah without the Torah telling me that. So then the whole Ki Yasir is extra. If the Torah is giving you a reason, it's superfluous, because Rab Shimon holds in the Chumash, if the Torah doesn't give you a reason, you could put in a reason to limit the mitzvah in a certain way. But so that the Torah doesn't have to give you the reason. But if the Torah goes out of its way to give you the reason, it's trying to include other things. And what's it trying to include? Not only from the 7 nations, it's not considered your child, but if the woman is from other nations, it's also not considered your child. That fits well according to Rab Shimon. But according to Rabbanim, the Torah had to teach you Ki Yasir because it's not extra, because if the Torah never has a reason, you can't say your own reason. So if the Torah is giving you a reason, so it's not an extra in the pasuk. So therefore, according to Rabbanan, how do you know from other nations that only if the woman is Jewish, it's a Jewish child. If the woman is a goy, it's non-Jewish child. How do you know that? So again, the Gemara answers the final teretz. You don't really need it, because Man Tana de Palaga Rabbi Yosef Behuda, who's the Tana of the Mishnah of the Brisa that argues Rabbi Yosef Behuda, that holds that you get 2 lavin over here. Rab Shimon, it's Rab Shimon. The whole author of this Brisa that argues against Rabbi Yosef Behuda is Rab Shimon, and Rab Shimon is Darish Time L'Kra, and therefore Ki Yasir is extra, and that comes to include that any goy that you marry is not your child. So in conclusion, and just to sum it all up, you marry your sister. It doesn't matter how your sister came about, whether your father had an affair or if through marriage, that's how it's your sister. You get an avera. It's your sister. Nevertheless, Rabbanan have a strict interpretation of the pasuk that if it's a sister through a normal marriage, you get 2 averas, one achoischa and one called bas eshes avicha. So you get 2 averas. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says you only get 1 avera. Nevertheless, the Gemara goes out of its way and says no matter who your father had an affair with, even if it's with a chayve krisis, it's still considered your sister. The only time it's not considered your sister is if it's with a goita or a shivcha. And those cases, that's not considered your sister, and it's not under the aroyas that's written in the Torah of sleeping with your sister. Okay, we'll do the Mishnah and then we'll stop. Okay, brand new Mishnah on Chaf Gimel Amud Beis. The Mishnah says like this: Misha Kiddush Achas Mishtei Achoyes. A guy, he has two women, 2 sisters, and he gave Kedushin to one of them. And he has no idea which one he gave Kedushin to. Now, how that's possible, let's say he goes over to 2 women and he says, here's a penny to each of you, a pruta, and I'm Mekadesh one of you, and I'm going to flip a coin, and if it lands on heads, then the one on the right will be my wife. Or if it lands on tails, it's the one on the left. He flips the coin, and the coin lands into a body of water, an ocean, and you can't find out. You can never know who he was Mekadesh. You can never figure out. So now he's really stuck. He's married to 2 sisters, but he doesn't know which one. What a funny thing. So he made Kedushin with 2 sisters, and he doesn't know which one he made Kedushin to. Says the Mishnah, you have to give a get. Doisen get lazul, get lazul. You give a get to both of them. Get to this one and a get to that one. Mace, if he died, v'loy ach echad, and he had 1 brother. Now let me introduce. If you have 1 brother, you have first of all, you have two issues you have to be aware of here. One issue is called achois zukukasai. In other words, if a woman falls to yibam, you can't go ahead and marry the sister because you're bonded to the woman that's falling to you to Yibam. And not only that, after you do chalitza, right, you can't marry the sister either, because that's achois chalutzosoi, the sister of somebody you made chalitza with. It's almost like if you gave a get to your wife, you can't marry the sister. So the Rabbanan said also that if you give chalitza to a woman, you can't marry the sister. So now here again, the case, the interesting story was that this man was Mekadesh two sisters, and he doesn't know which one, and then he died, and he has one brother. So the Mishnah says choylitz l'shteim. He gives chalitza to both because he can't do chalitza to one and do yibam to one, because once he does chalitza to one, he can't marry the second one, because that's called achois chalutzosai, which is also to him. He can't give a yibam to one because maybe that's not the real one. That's not the woman that's falling to yibam, and he's marrying the sister of the one that's falling to yibam. So that's why he should do chalitza to both. But what happened? The guy died and he had two brothers. So then echad choylitz, one should do chalitza to one sister, the echad miyabim, one could do the miyabim to the other sister, because the one that does chalitza, if it's the real yavama, fine. And if it's not the real yavama, so then the second one is doing the yibam. And even if the first one did the real yavama, the one that's doing yibam, that's not a chois chalutzasai, because he wasn't the one that did chalitza. The other one, his brother, did the chalitza, so he's permitted to marry the sister. Kadmu v'tansu, but let's say this one brother right away married, did the yibam, ein metzian miyadam, then we don't force him to get divorced. He's marrying a chois zuku kasai, but that's not a problem, because when the second one does chalitza, so then the zika goes off, falls away. It's not called achois zukukase anymore. It's not like you married the sister of somebody who's bonded, because you're not bonded to that woman anymore. So then, b'diavad, it works. Next, shnayim shekitzu shtei achoyes. Two people were makadesh two sisters. Ze ani day is a kiddush, ze ani day is a kiddush. You have two people that were makadesh two women, right? So you have Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Moshe and Aaron are brothers. Here's the picture. And they both were Mekadesh Rachel and Leah, and Reuven was Mekadesh Rachel and Leah, I'm sorry, Reuven was Mekadesh Rachel and Leah, Moshe was Mekadesh Rachel and Leah. No one knows which sister was what, and Reuven and Moshe died. So now here we're going to have another case. Let's say Lezeh Echad, one has one brother, Uzeh Shnayim, and the other has two brothers. Okay, I'm sorry. Each one gives two gettin. Meisu, they both die. This has one brother, this has one brother. This one gives two chalitzas and this one two chalitzas. Exactly like we said in the first case. In other words, when there's only one brother, then you do two chalitza. Then he has to do chalitza to both. So I don't care if it's two different people that got involved with this, and each one has only one brother. Each one does chalitza to both women. But what happens? This is the case. This Reuven and Moshe were Makadesh, two sisters. They both died. They don't know which one is which. So Shimon, obviously, is only one brother. He gives two chalitzas. That's the point. We always remember that. If there's only one brother and you don't know which sister is the Yavama, you have to give two chalitzas. But Moshe, since he has two brothers, actually one can give chalitza and the other brother can marry another sister. And because when there's two brothers, one could do chalitza and one could do yibam. Let's say one did yibam first, then we don't make him divorce, because by the other defaulting to do chalitza will take away the isra of achois zukukasai. Lezeshtaim was neshtaim. This is the final case. You have each one has two brothers. Reuven and Moshe, again, were Makadesh, two sisters. Nobody knows which sister belongs to which brother, which man. So then Reuven and Moshe both die, and they both have two brothers fall to Yibam. So each one of them, so we tell, you can probably figure this out. It's very simple. One brother from each pair does chalitza to the woman. And then each other brother can do the chalitza on the opposite opposite sides, could do Yibam on the opposite side, Chalitza. Because Manashach, if that woman is the one that you're supposed to do Yibam with, so you're doing Yibam. But even if it's not the one to do Yibam with, let's say you were supposed to do Chalitza with that woman is supposed to fall to Yibam to the other stranger, well, that she already got her Chalitza, so you're allowed to do the Yibam to the Chalitza of the opposite party. Okay, so let's just see the picture. Reuven and Moshe died. Shimon does Chalitza to Leah. Let's say Shimon does Chalitza to Leah. Then Eliezer from the other family could marry Leah. Levi does Chalitza to Rachel, and Aaron does Chalitza to Rachel, and Levi can marry Rachel. So each one marries the Chalitza done on the opposite family. But Kadmu Shnayim v'Cholzu, if two of them did Chalitza of the same family, Lo Yabim Shnayim, we shouldn't have them do both of them do Chalitza, because it's like a regular case. One should do Chalitza and one should do Yibam. Kadmu v'Kansu, but if they both married the woman, Ein Moitzian Miyadam, because Monashach, either they're doing the Yibam and he's just marrying a Chais Zukukasai, but even if he's not doing Yibam, by the fact that the other one did the Yibam, so then you're permitted to marry. The Zika falls off. So therefore, if they both married the girls, we don't force them to get divorced. This last Mishnah is like a GMAT test, but basically you get the idea of when someone marries two sisters, it could run into problems if there's one brother or two brothers. Okay.
Shkaya, thank you.
I'll send you the picture.
Okay, please send the pictures, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good night. Bye.